One of the things that bothers me a lot about education is that we tend to talk about the people that are the closest to the delivery of education, but we rarely talk to them. And so this is an article by Ed Week that tries to reverse that. Actually interviews some teachers, one of whom has a business that he helps other teachers leave the profession. So he's interacting with lots and lots of teachers who are dissatisfied. And so he's got a great sense of what's driving that frustration. What I wanted to do is walk this article through with you, but I also wanted to remind you that we talk about teachers, but we also talk about students, and we rarely talk to them. We never give either party autonomy to make decisions or to change what they don't like in the system, because the system is always driven top down. Let's get into this and we can talk more about it later, but I wanted to make sure that this article was something that you heard and saw so that you can start to appreciate the pressures that are under teachers and how unrealistic is some of the things we're asking of them. So teacher retention and teacher dissatisfaction is definitely growing. There's a lot of data that points to that. Here's a young man, Zachary Long, who left teaching and then set up a company where he now helps other people do the same. It's called Life After Teaching. He's out of Florida, if I recall. So again, he's worked with a bunch of folks, and watch this. Multiple reasons rise to the top of that list, but student behavior is a leading complaint Long hears from teachers who contemplate or leave teaching, and one he believes is among the hardest to address. I agree, but I would also argue that if you're not addressing student behavior with the student directly and the parent, then you're asking for trouble. You're not asking the people who are actually most involved. What's going on? What would it take for you to have a better sense about this environment, or to be in this environment and want to be here? These are questions that don't usually come up because the child, the student, has the least power in this whole educational environment, when really that's the person that should have the most autonomy and the most self-leadership. So he goes on, he doesn't think anyone has the answer to extreme student behavior targeting teachers that's resulted in physical or emotional harm. And so he's seen examples of students that are threatening young teachers, et cetera, et cetera. These are social problems. They are not educational problems. And the more we think about education as what happens in the wall of the school, the more we ignore all the stuff that's going on outside of the school. And so in these circumstances, what has happened historically is you bring police in to now police that situation. If a child is angry, you bring a police force in to capture that kid and to make sure that he keeps the environment safe. That kid just gets on a pathway to prison at that moment. So again, education doesn't think about the child and how learning can be structured around the child and their needs. It's always based on the structure of the school and the school's needs. No doubt this is a tricky, tough problem, but if you're not having conversations with parents, if you're not understanding what's happening to the child on an emotional level, if you're pushing that child to continue to learn when they're tired, hungry, or afraid, you are not going to make progress. You're actually going to probably aggravate a problem. And we're asking teachers to teach in that environment. That's not fair. Also talks about out-of-touch administrators. That ranks as one of the top reasons teachers say they want to quit. So these are examples from a person who has had a ton of interaction with teachers that are trying to leave, but how much of this actually goes into how we think about supporting teachers differently? I would argue very little. And then of course, pay, that's one of the other pieces, but he also points out it is not the primary complaint. We only hear about pay. We don't hear about teacher autonomy, which we'll get to in a moment. We don't hear about flexibility on the job, et cetera, which we'll also get to in a moment. So here's another person, Bo Thompson. He's been teaching for 30 years, tops out at $58,000. He left to go to be a professional actor, which is probably something he was longing to do for a long time anyway. He talks about something that I talk about all of the time, folks. His main gripe was that the educational system is out of date, noting its development during the Industrial Revolution. He feels the state's educational leaders are more concerned with obtaining a 100% graduation rate than whether students are actually learning. So this is entirely true. Industrial Revolution developed a system. That system really doesn't work in 2023. That system is just broken to the point of not being reparable. The problem, though, is we're still asking teachers to work in that environment where they will say to a child, Yes, you have to learn this. The child says, why? And the teacher says, because it's going to be on the test. And the child knows for certain that that content doesn't matter in his future or her future. But the teacher has to keep driving it because that is the top-down standards model that we have come to embrace again 150 years ago, and it's still in place. So this teacher talks about it. A ton of teachers echo this. Ton of teachers. I've read so many books and articles from teachers saying, we got to throw this system out. This system doesn't work for young people. It doesn't work for teachers. It doesn't work for the changing dynamics of families, but yet we keep on doing what doesn't work. All right, let me move on. He also talked about this issue of autonomy for teachers. And now he was a history teacher. And even before Texas enacted the HB 3979 bill, which discourages conversations of race and history from classrooms, even before that, he felt like the top-down pressures were to muzzle him, to take any hard conversation out of the classroom. Hard conversations are where young people learn how to think. It is not indoctrination if it is a conversation about how would you think about this? What are the factors that are playing into the Civil War? What are the dynamics that Martin Luther King had to deal with? These are conversations that cause a person to think. If we pull them out of school, not only do we discourage teachers because they're no longer autonomous, but we're also telling kids anything that's controversial, we don't want to talk about it. What does that mean for a democracy who doesn't know how to talk about the things that are difficult about a democracy, the ironies and the challenges of a democracy? That is what this teacher struggled with and part of the reason why he left. Here's another teacher, Vicki Weber. She became pregnant and went on maternity leave and then decided to leave the profession. So why? Because she doesn't have flexibility. And in an environment where there are so many jobs that are remote, that are highly flexible, we keep looking at teachers the same way we looked at them in 1923. You must come here. There's no other option. You can't have a hybrid structure. You can't do any of those things. You must come here and do exactly as the teacher did in 1923, maybe with a little bit more tech in the room, but you're definitely not creating the environment where there's flexibility for teachers to learn, to teach in different ways, certainly not giving students many options for more flexibility. So these are all interrelated dynamics. Teacher lack of autonomy, essentially have deprofessionalized teaching. Student behavior, which means that if you want to deal with students and help teachers, you got to deal with the student. You got to find out what's going on with them. You got to find out what's going on with the parent. And if you're not doing those things, good luck, teachers. You're being asked to do something that's completely unreasonable. And then, of course, the third issue is about pay. Teachers having all these different skill sets and skill sets that are actually marketable. And what we're seeing, I actually had a friend who left teaching. She went through a Amazon training process online, left, went right into a training job at Amazon, making almost double what she was making. And that is that's a recognition now that teachers have far more options. And so if we are not competing with the Amazons of the world in terms of how we attract teachers, how we give them autonomy, how we give them the freedom to make decisions, then we are going to lose them. Well, let me correct that. We're going to lose the good ones. The bad ones will remain because they have no other choices. The good ones are going to find other jobs. I wanted to share this with you again so that you could start to get a sense of what's actually behind the terrible news reporting you might hear about education. This is actually the dynamic that, if not addressed, if we do not have a broader conversation about what's happening in the classroom, if we do not have a broader conversation about how do we rethink about this classroom in a way that works for 21st century, the teachers have many more options to earn more pay in different areas, the good teachers that is, that students are realizing they can learn in 1,000 different ways rather than necessarily going to a building every day, that if parents aren't a part of this conversation, if students aren't engaged and empowered, all of these problems are going to be maintained, and that to me is it's foolish. So again, hopefully this was helpful. I'll be sharing more of what I'm learning, and hopefully you all will learn along with me. Thanks so much, and more to come.